You wouldn't be able to hear music if it wasn't for this one thing. Now think about it. All music is sound frequency, right? Sound frequencies are all around us. In fact, they're infinite. Our human brains can perceive sounds all around us, some of which we classify as music, some of which we classify as background noise, some of which we classify as absolute annoyance. What makes these frequencies different? Why do we not call all sound frequencies music? We definitely can differentiate between something that sounds pleasing and we call music versus something we find annoying, like the garbage man outside your window at 2 a.m., and we call that noise. So essentially what we've done is we've started to classify these sounds. And in order to classify sounds, we have to differentiate them from one another. And in order to differentiate something, you have to first give it meaning. You have to give it importance, and you have to give it value. So that word value is similar to the word volume, right? So volume, we think of like a container. We think of, being able to hold a certain capacity, right? We need to hold space. So really what makes music is the space that we've given to contain music, right? We've given it importance. And of course, musicians and music theorists and composers have discovered what sounds good, and they've given or made these rules that we can duplicate and replicate to create, a similar effect. When we, if anyone wants to compose music, they can if they understand these rules. So today I really want to get into some of these organizational rules. I want to dive into the etymology of some terms that get thrown around in music theory, such as meter, time signatures, measures, the staff. And I also want to go into how I approach learning rhythms, how I approach counting, and how I approach time signatures. So before we get into this video, guys, as many of you might know, I love to arrange for the guitar. It's my passion in music. I do it for myself. I also do it for my students. But I didn't always understand how to arrange. And in fact, I felt like sometimes I would get lucky and I would stumble on something that sounded really good. And other times it wouldn't. I would take months to figure out a song and sometimes spend hours of frustration trying to come up with the right chords to harmonize a melody. And, it just felt like guesswork to me. And I just wish there was like a more straightforward path to arranging and to understanding what sounds good on the guitar. So through trial and error and, doing it a lot, I've come up with this 10-step blueprint that I want to share with you guys today. And it's literally just things that I do when I'm arranging, things that I've learned that I've applied into arranging. It's going to give you guys like a structure, like a path to follow. So that way, if you ever get lost, you don't know what to do next, you can really just stick to the plan. So listen, guys, it's free. It's in the description. Just click the link and download it. There's also an accompanying video where you can watch me arrange a song. So go check that out if that's something you're interested in. But now we're going to get into the importance of organizing sounds in music. You've probably heard someone talk about like all music is written on a staff. The staff is divided into measures. We have a time signature, we have a key signature, a treble clef, like all these terms, they're just givens, right? They're facts. You just have to memorize them and accept them as part of music. But yeah, what does that mean? Why do we actually use these words? What's the significance? Right? And as we start to understand these systems, we start to hear music all around us, which is kind of funny because things that used to sound like maybe background noise or we didn't pay much attention to will start to have a musical connotation given to them. And I think that it kind of plays into why musicians generally like more complex music than normies do. It's because they're able to perceive these organizational structures and they're able to hear music in more things. So what we want to do is we want to start to enhance our ability to perceive these structures. And we want to start to enhance our ability to capture that lightning in a bottle. That way we can enjoy it over and over again. We can recreate it, and it doesn't have to be this magical thing. It can be a instant thing. Okay. So the first word I want to look at is staff. So I'm going to read off a couple definitions for you of staff. So many extended senses are from the notion of that which upholds or supports, or that which sustains, such as the staff of life or the bread of life. This is from the biblical phrase, break the staff, which is used to reference cutting off the supply of food. And that's from Leviticus. So right from the get-go, staff has a very supportive function. It's actually sustaining life. Now in music, we're using it to sustain sound frequencies, right? And organize these frequencies. So of course the staff is a series of lines and spaces, right? 5 lines, 4 spaces. And we put the notes, on different lines or spaces to represent how high or how low the frequency is. But we've set a standard for each note, right? So we've come up with what notes sound good. We've created the major scale, right, in Western music. So we're able to now place these and chart these frequencies on the staff, going up and down. And of course, left and right, we're able to show how these frequencies move through time, right? And we call that rhythm. So the staff basically holds space, right? It is the space for music to live, at least to live on paper. Okay. So next I want to take a look at the word measure. So I'm going to read off some definitions here. So in the mid 14th century, measure meant to deal out or to divide up by measure. It also meant to ascertain spatial dimensions, quantity, or capacity of by comparison with a standard. Okay, and also from the 14th century, we have measuring, meaning the sense's proper proportion and balance. There's a lot of key things here I want to touch on. First, spatial dimensions. That seems to mean that we're organizing something in time-space, right? And quantity and capacity seems to point to being able to contain it. So thinking like a bottle or a container that we can perceive having a capacity of either being full or empty. And proportion and balance being everything being harmonious, right? Sounding pleasing to the ears, right? A lot of these rules that have been observed, such as the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence, Tesla's 3, 6, and 9, like all these observable things that we've discovered, I think, are all connected into music here. So the way we arrange music, the way we organize music, is all based off of a fundamental way how the universe works. So measures are basically a way to organize notes in space. It's the container. But let's take a look at the root word of measure, which is mete, M-E-T-E. And this means to allot. It comes from the Old English Saxon word, which is meten, which means to measure, to ascertain the dimension or quantity of. Okay, so to me, this is all confirming the idea that in order to see something as being empty or full, like for instance, our bottle, our measure, right? We have to first have an agreed upon value. Okay? And that word value is going to come into play here in a different musical vocabulary word. And it's actually very similar to the word mete, right? Mete. What does that sound like that we've heard before in music? I'll give you guys a couple seconds to put it down in the comments if you know what it is. If you guess meter, that is correct. So meter is another word for time signature. So the time signature is, the 4/4, the number that comes in the beginning of the music, right? 3, 4, 6, 8. I'm sure you've seen these time signatures and maybe you know kind of how they work. But essentially what time signature does is it assigns a value for the number of beats that a measure can hold, right? So using our bottle analogy, it's kind of like saying, okay, so here's the bottle's the measure and the time signature is like the number of ounces that the bottle can hold. So let's say you have a 32-ounce bottle. 32 would be the top number of the time signature, and ounces would be the bottom number or the unit of measurement. So we can change the bottom number depending on what unit we want to use. So like, for example, let's say we're not in America like I am here. We want to have that same bottle of milk. Well, we would probably measure it using liters, right? So the volume of the container stays constant, but we can change the unit of measurement. So in music, these units of measurement are rhythms such as like the quarter note, the half note, the eighth note, right? And then the number, the value, is any number that we assign to be the whole container. So for instance, 4 is a very common value, 3 is a very common value, 6, 5, 9, 7, right? It could be any number you want. The word meter also has some poetic and linguistic history. So meter in poetic context is the poetic measure, the metrical scheme, the arrangement of language in a series of rhythmic movements. So, wow, we're literally talking about music being patterned off of language. I wonder if we looked at the way human beings speak in their languages, if we could find a lot of parallels to their music. It kind of reminds me of when I was a kid and I would be singing along to instrumental music, and a lot of times I would make up these words that didn't have any meaning. They were just kind of like a sound that kind of correlated to the way I heard the instrument that was playing the sound. And I just associated these sounds with these words, if you will. It's interesting because almost like the way we speak and the way we use our words is the signature that we put on the world, like our life, right? The way we arrange our words in time is our signature that we leave on this earth. Just the way the time signature leaves its signature on the measure. All right, so we have the staff. We know that the staff is the space that we hold music. And we know that the staff is organized in a container called the measure. And we know that the measure is assigned a value by the time signature. But we have a wild card here now, and that is tempo. Okay, the word tempo comes from the Italian word tempo, which literally means time. Okay, and the plural form of tempo is tempi. So one measure can have the same numerical value, use a different unit of measurement, but sound exactly the same. And we do that by using tempo. Okay, so tempo is like the relative speed of which we see things moving, the relative speed of motion. In this case, we're talking about the speed of music, but I would add a little clarification here that it's actually the relative speed of the beat, right? So for example, we could have a measure of 4/4 time and a measure of 4/8 time. Okay, proportionally, we know that eighth notes are twice as fast as quarter notes. So we would think that a measure of 4/8 would be twice as fast as a measure of 4/4. But you would be wrong, because we can actually determine the speed by the time signature. It doesn't work that way, right? We actually determine the speed by assigning a tempo. So let's say we had, in 4/4, our beat was here. This is the quarter note. But in 4/8, our beat was here. This is the eighth note. We just assigned the exact same tempo for a different beat, okay? So this could get confusing a little bit, right? You can literally write things two different ways and have them sound exactly the same. So this is why I think it's better to think in terms of beats instead of in terms of units of measurement like quarter notes or eighth notes. Okay, and that's because eighth notes, quarter notes, all these rhythms they're finite, right? They're dependent on a certain context, okay? But we have a unit that is infinite, and that unit is the beat, right? You've heard me talk about the beat a couple times here already in this video. But if you think about, all measures are just a number, right? A value of beats, then it's simple. We always have the same unit of value. The measure is just the whole. It contains everything, right? So a measure's value can change, but its unit of measurement will always stay the same if we think in beats. So basically, all of this is to say that in order to perceive something as music, we need to be able to identify frequencies, and we need to be able to organize them into beats. So if we start with the whole measure, we can then divide that whole measure into beats, okay? And then we can then take those beats and we can divide them into smaller beats called microbeats, okay? And these beats are all proportionally divided, and there's really no limit to how you can divide these beats. You can divide them in twos, threes, fours, fives, etc. Okay? So when I'm figuring out a rhythm, what I like to first do is identify what the smallest unit or the smallest microbeat or the smallest subdivision is. So that might be eighth notes, that might be 16th notes, 32nd notes. And once I do that, I want to then figure out what the next largest beat is. So maybe it's eighth notes, and then maybe the next largest beat, which is quarter notes. So I want to be able to feel where those subdivisions are. Okay. Then what I do is I tap my foot along to the bigger beat, right? And then I tap my hands to the smaller microbeat. Okay. And of course, we might have rhythms that combine different microbeats. We might have eighth notes and 16th notes. We might have triplets. We might have 32nd notes, right? So we need to be able to switch back and forth between these different subdivisions or different microbeats. But once you can figure out like how many microbeats are in the longer beats, right? Then you just keep track of how many microbeats are in each note. For instance, if I have an eighth note and then I have 16th notes, I know that there's going to be two 16th notes in every eighth note because we're dividing it in twos. Or let's say I have a quarter note and then I have eighth note triplets. I know that there's going to be three triplets in every quarter note. So I'm just dividing into threes, dividing the beat. So I'm spreading time. I'm taking a beat and I'm dividing it equally with the microbeat, with the smaller beat. So let's take a look here at an example. All right, here's an example in 4/4. So in this first measure, I have eighth notes, quarter notes, and 16th notes. So the smallest subdivision is the 16th notes. I'm actually going to break this measure into two halves because the first half is eighth notes and quarter notes. The second half is 16th notes and eighth notes. So in the first half, I'm going to think in eighth notes. Okay, I'm just going to say this is an eighth note. So I know that there's two eighth notes in every quarter note. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to now tap with my foot the quarter note every two eighth notes. Okay, so now I know that when I see a quarter note, I'm just going to give it two eighth notes. So the first half of this measure would be like this. Okay. Okay, so I'm counting that. But you could count it like 1, 2, and right. That's the more standard way to count it. But as long as you keep track of how many subdivisions are in the larger beats. For the 16th note part, I want to switch to 16th notes. Now we know 16th notes are twice as fast as eighth notes. So this is my eighth note. So now I need to think twice as fast as that. Okay. So I still have my quarter note here in my foot. So I'm keeping track of the beat. So I want to keep track of keeping track of the 16th notes. Now you could use 1E enda, 2E enda, 3E enda, 4E enda. All right, so you guys can practice this on your own. I'll leave a link to that website. It's like rhythmrandomizer.com. You can practice your own rhythms. And I also have another video that you can check out that goes into why you should really focus on practicing rhythms by itself and almost think like a drummer, so you can really internalize how to play certain rhythms. So I'll leave a link to that video also in the description or somewhere up here so you can watch that. So let's summarize a little bit what we talked about today, guys. So first is without organization, we would not be able to hear rhythms. We would not be able to hear music. Okay? Time organization is really important because it allows us to contain these frequencies that are all around us and give them meaning and give them feeling and emotion, right? We can assign a relation to that. Okay, so we looked at some words in the etymology dictionary. We looked at the word staff, and we found out the staff is like the space in which the notes live, in which the music lives. It holds space, it supports and it uplifts and it provides the life for the music. Okay, we looked at measure, and we found out that measure is basically how we contain those notes. Okay, it's the container, it's the bottle, right? And we looked at the word meter, time signature, and we learned that that is the way we quantify the container, right? How much value do we give that measure? How many beats are in that measure? And what unit of measurement are we using? Okay? And then finally, we talked about tempo. Tempo being kind of the X factor, in which this is how we determine the speed in which we move through time. Okay? And we found out that we can actually have two different meters and they can sound exactly the same just by changing the tempo. And that leads to the final conclusion here, is that we need to think in terms of beats instead of thinking in terms of notes, because beats are infinite, notes are finite. Okay, so no matter what unit of measurement you're using, whether it's eighth notes or quarter notes, we still need to just find what the big beat is and what are the micro beats, right? Be able to feel that. Now, of course, you can know what a 16th note is, you can know what an eighth note is and everything. In fact, you definitely should know that, right? But you don't necessarily have to change anything the way you think about music, whether it's written as an eighth note or as a 16th note or as a quarter note, right? It's all proportions and dividing beats into microbeats. So with that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Leave me a comment. Let me know. Like the video. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, as I put up a lot of different kinds of videos. I do these little lessons here where I talk about music theory, and I also put out some of my tutorials for my students when they are learning songs, and I do put out arrangements of fingerstyle guitar songs. So if you're into that stuff, definitely consider subscribing, and I'll leave you with that, guys. I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.